So I'm so delighted today to talk to Braden Duemmler, who I've known for 25 years, maybe, or close to that, which seems like a long, maybe just 20 years. Braden was one of my first students since I got a job and started teaching at University of Vermont, and I have to say, still remains in my memory one of my best all-time students. So I don't want to confine him to that, because I'm talking to him today as a filmmaker who has a film that is now just in the last 2 days released on Netflix and has rocketed to the top of the Netflix charts and is the #1 film on Netflix as we speak. And what I want to talk to Braden about really is the way he brings together theorizing and brings it into filmic practice. And I think that's what's really important about him as a filmmaker. But first, I want to do a little background. So first, can you just tell me how you got into filmmaking and theory too, but mostly filmmaking? What really sparked your interest in it? What got you to the position where you're in now?
Well, Todd, every time I do an interview, I tell very straight up that was you that got me into film, really. I grew up watching movies. I grew up loving movies. I still remember one of the first movies I saw in theaters was Home Alone. But I was very much an athlete growing up, and that was my passion. It was I put all my energy into that. And I was hoping to get into college through athletics. Right. It didn't work out, and so I ended up going to University of Vermont, even though I deferred a couple years in between high school and college. And I took a film theory class thinking, oh, this will be an easy class. I just get to watch movies and talk about them. No big deal. And it was your passion for the subject matter. It was seeing all these films I'd never even heard of before, watching them, dissecting them. I just found it fascinating. I just loved talking about them with you and like arguing with you about them. And, I was bringing my big jug of water from the gym that you used to love
I remember that.
Rag on me about. But yeah, and so it just kind of evolved from there to the point where I enjoyed the theory. I kept taking more and more theory classes, and to the point where I had to make a decision: am I going to be an English major, or am I going to be a film major? And I was worried about doing film because what are you going to do with that as a major, right? You have to think of that. And my dad goes, if you love it, just do it. Like it doesn't matter right now. Like nobody cares about college degrees and what you do anymore. It just, as long as you finish college. And so I went ahead and did the film theory major, and then I realized I actually went to China to study abroad, and I was taking Mandarin at the time, and I was walking through a park one day, and I saw this guy on a bench singing out of a notebook, and he wasn't singing to the crowd. He wasn't singing for anybody in particular. He just seemed to be singing out of the pure joy of singing to himself almost. And I kind of just thought in my head, who is he singing to? Why is he singing? How often does he do this? And I realized I wanted to tell that story, and that's what made me go from theory to a filmmaker and wanting to be a storyteller. And that idea actually became one of my first short films, which is called She Always, when I actually ended up at USC, because after that I immediately applied to film schools, and thankfully I was able to get into USC out in LA. And from then on, it was just a kind of a forward trajectory, trying to make stuff and, make people enjoy it,
Do you think that was a crucial decision for you to go to a MFA program? And do you think, like, if you hadn't done that, you wouldn't be in the position you're in today? Or do you think, well, no, like it didn't, I probably, like, that wasn't so crucial to me getting to the point where I could make my own film and have it be so successful?
It's really tough to say. I think it depends on who you are as an individual and what you get the most out of it. Like, if you really need structure in your life to excel, I think going to a master's program in film is really helpful, because it forces you to just make stuff, and it forces you to make it quick and make it efficiently, and it teaches you the process of film. But if you're the type of person that is creative and just a go-getter, and can just go and do things, then you can just buy a camera and start shooting stuff and just kind of learn as you go. I think the greatest value out of film school that I got was just the process of making it and the people I made it with. And
Right.
not
So were those connections important to you or not
oh,
so much,
absolutely.
really? They were.
Absolutely. Most of the team on What Lies Below was USC classmates. The DOP was one of my good friends that I shot Ryan Coogler's short film Fig with. The composer was the composer on She Always and my thesis film Mimic. Abel Vane was a classmate who was one of the producers. And it's just the whole film was littered with people that I actually went to school with and was, in the trenches with when we were freaking out about how are we going to do all these classes and make a movie this weekend kind of thing. So,
But would you say I think probably, I mean, UVM is a very theoretical place, right? And so I'm sure that was different at USC, right? Like it wasn't I like it was much more of a practical enterprise, right? So how when you came to think about making your own film, how did you integrate those two? Did you just kind of keep the theory in the background and then just sort of let it be unconscious and then have it come out? Or did you really explicitly say like, oh, here I'm thinking about, say, I don't know, the gaze. I'm just coming up with something,
right.
right? Or or I'm thinking about the spectator's desire and how I'm going to manipulate that desire. Did you do that, or did you just say, well, what works here? I'm just going to have the theoretical stuff in my background.
Well, I'd say as a creator for me, that it always starts with the seed of the idea and whatever that is, right? And sometimes the idea can grow on its own, and other times it needs a little help along the way. And when it does need help, I love to dive into theory. But a lot of times it can just grow organically. And but I still think that even when it grows, out of me organically, I still think that it's because of my background in theory that is informing it constantly. I think back to, the short film She Always, there's a lot of stuff about, repetition compulsion there and, kind of like a death drive in a weird way. And not to make it as dark of a film as it is, because it's actually a much more positive film, but, there are these things that are functioning in it that I don't necessarily know if I was conscious of when I was coming up with the idea.
Right.
And then there's other films like Echo. I made another short film called Echo, where I was actually interested in the idea of the gaze. And it's just about a guy who becomes obsessed with a painting and he doesn't understand why, and I really wanted to explore that actively. And I think, this all culminates in, What Lies Below, because it's both. There really are times that I was actively thinking about it as I was writing it and as I was directing it. And there was other times I was just going with my instincts, what was in my head,
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. And,
No.
and so, yeah, I feel I'm in a good place now as a creator because it's fluid for me. The theory informs the storytelling, and the storytelling kind of bounces off the theory. So
That's great. I mean, it's ideal, really, I think.
yeah, no, I think so.
Do
And
you
go ahead.
I
Sorry.
was just going to say, when you're directing actors or directing even the crew,
Yeah.
do you ever put it in a theoretical, I mean, not in a obviously you have to put it in a way that's practical, but do you ever like say, look, this is what I'm going for here and let's try to realize that? Or you just kind of, you let it just flow more organically?
I think it's so I will say directing actors is probably one of the things that I didn't even realize when I was in film school, theory school,
Yeah.
that was so important to a director's job. I always thought the director's job was to pick the camera, pick the angles, tell the story visually, and then the acting just somebody figures out the acting. Like I had no idea the director was so involved, right? And so then I get to film school and there's entire classes set up just for directing actors.
Okay.
And I think for that reason, I've kind of compartmentalized the two. I do both. Like I know exactly where I want my camera. The cinematographer I use, Jimmy Lou, he always jokes. He goes, "Braden, you're making me look so good," or like I love this shot, And I'm like, "Well, thanks, bud." And but he contributes a lot too, obviously. But it's like I definitely am much more definitive about where my camera is, where the camera is at a particular moment. And at the same time, I'm constantly, shaping the actors, but I also love letting them, because they're so creative too. When you get to the big ranks of really great talents, that you kind of sometimes just want to see what they bring to it and enhance that. And I haven't found a moment really as a crossover where I'm kind of talking about theory. I'm definitely talking about psychology, and I think that's informed by my theory background.
Yeah.
But the actual where the camera is, I think the actor, the only thing they really wants to know is how close the shot is.
Yeah.
And where, if there's any movement that they have to worry about,
But you do talk to them about their psychic, like
Yes.
what that character is supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Feeling. Yeah.
And one example who's great is the boat scene in What Lies Below. Was probably one of the few times Emma and I didn't agree on how to perform it. And so
Can you just describe this, because it's a great scene, I think, and one that has, as you just were talking to me, has offended a lot of people,
Yes.
which is kind of shocking. But yeah,
Yes.
Can you just describe what happens? Because it's a great scene, I think.
Well, yeah, in order to describe what happens, I guess what I have to do is talk about the film as a whole. Like, the film is built on kind of this female gaze, as I've tried to create it with the team, as we've tried to create it. And so there's this desire functioning throughout the film where Libby is very much the looker and John is the looked at. He's the object. He's the fetishized thing, right?
And even the film looks at him that way, I think. Not just her. I mean, she does, but also the film does.
Yeah, and we're trying to give. We were trying throughout to give her perspective and get those shots of John as an object. And so this kind of carries you through the first 20, 30 minutes of the film. You're kind of, I think it functions in a way that we're trying to get you to go, is something going to happen between this 16-year-old girl and this 30-year-old man? Like, and in a very uncomfortable way, maybe you're rooting for that train wreck, like it's right. Almost inappropriate, right? And so the boat scene, they're in this tiny raft that is too close, they're touching legs, and Liberty obviously has an attraction, and John is allowing it to flourish, and in the middle of their conversation, Liberty, 16, menstruates, and there's water in the boat, so she doesn't really realize it. And it starts to flow out, and John reacts by putting his shirt in her crotch, on her vagina to stop the bleeding, right? Yeah. And there's this moment where they just both freeze at what happens, and Liberty's reaction is to say, "I'm sorry," because which I wrote because it always felt like there was some sort of shame involved with menstruation. And so that was my instinct to write, "I'm sorry." And John then apologizes. And then John tries to tell her it's natural. It's no big deal. Like, everybody does it. And then he goes a step further by taking the blood and licking it and saying, "You got a little red in your hair," which is part of the mythology of the film, which is a separate issue. And there's another part of it that we should mention, is that when John is in the lake, he's actually going to find, he's a aquatic geneticist, so he's looking for lamprey specimen, and he actually has a few lampreys on the lake, and one of them spills in the boat, and one of them spills out into the menstruation blood and is like wiggling in the blood. And that was purposeful in my mind. So put all together, I was trying to give you that moment where your desire was kind of reflected back on you, and you were like, "Oh my God, I don't want this at all," just because I want to align you with Libby, because that's what Libby is feeling in that moment. You know what I'm saying?
So it's a little like, were you thinking about this at all? But it makes me think immediately of Psycho, where the car starts to go down into the swamp, and you're like, "Oh, wait," and then it stops sinking for a minute. You're like, wait, sink, and you realize, like, "Oh wait, I'm part of this plot to cover up a murder, and I'm in favor of it." And so it's kind of, are you saying it's kind of like that, right? Like, you realize that your desire is for this thing that you really shouldn't be desiring.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, and I think, the kind of the phallus and the blood and all these different things that I was trying to work in was, I wanted to kind of shock, like, less of a realization and more of a an almost ephemeral reaction, like a physical response to it, or a unconscious response to it, like, no, holy crap, get me out of here. And it was interesting too, because that's the way Liberty, Emma, who's so incredible, she's cast in Lord of the Rings right now. She's shooting in New Zealand, and she was so fantastic. But in this moment, she wanted to get out of the boat. Like, I get that. She was like, I want to, like, run. I want to get out of here. But I always had it in my moment that is such an insane thing to do, that you would just freeze. You would just be shocked to stillness,
Right. So that was a moment of kind of where you and the actor were at odds with each other.
A little bit performance wise. And, I will say that probably part of it was because I wanted that moment of just quiet after it happened to let it settle in. And another part of it was because that's how I interpreted Libby, not any woman, but Libby's reaction to that, because she is such up until that point, a more or less, somewhat passive, a little bit, how do you say, reserved, or like kind of trapped in her own skin at times. She hasn't grown up yet, really, in a lot of ways, even though she sometimes seems like the adult in the relationship with her mom.
Right. I mean, it's funny because her mom constantly refers to her as baby girl. Right. And so it's like, so to say that she's the adult in the relationship, it's like her mom is resisting that through that appellation of baby girl. Right. And that's how I felt. Like, I felt like she's trying to keep her down, because I also think, her mom also sees her as somewhat of a rival. Like, she sees, I think, that she desires John as well. Right. And so there's this, I mean, it seemed to me like it was I don't mean this in a reductive way, but there seemed to be this whole Oedipal background, but reversed, where it's like, it's the woman in competition with not the boy in competition with the father, but the woman in competition with the mother for the guy. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things when I set out to write like a female-driven film, I was terrified, right? I was really worried because I didn't want to be that person that gets killed on Twitter about, writing women inaccurately. And so I talked to my sisters a lot, and I read a lot of books, about female psychology, especially through the teenage years. And one of the things I found most interesting was this constant push and pull from independence to fierce freedom, independence to fierce dependence. That girls go through with their moms a lot of the time over the course of being a teenager. And so I wanted to put that into the script, and the way I did it was, I created I had the personality of Libby, and so for the mom, I kind of did the exact opposite. So whereas Libby is more reserved, less about sexuality, less about, looks and vanity, and more about her mind, Michelle is much more, like, everything's beautiful. I'm having a great time. I got this new young man, and it's awesome, and that does translate further out into her being, a little, sometimes feels like she's more of the kid in the relationship, the mom, and the daughter is much more the mature one, just because based on the way they react. And I don't think I ever intended for there to be necessarily a rivalry, but I do think there's some deep scars there because of the way the grandpa felt about the daughter as opposed to the mom. And I think that facilitates the connection they have, because Libby, I think they both realize that even though they want to be independent, they both need each other deeply. Right. And that's one of the reasons that Libby doesn't abandon her in the end. And you kind of need that as a writer,
Right. I mean, I think as a spectator, you're really rooting for her to abandon her.
Yeah.
Because you realize that she's probably not going to survive if she doesn't, right? Or whatever happens to her at the end, she's entrapped, right, or whatever, she's converted, I guess, is probably the best way to think of it. Or I shouldn't have given away the end, but it's okay. So maybe I'll cut that out. But I wonder if can you talk about, so the menstruation scene, that really is a turning point in the film, right? Like so her attitude, what is it, about 30 minutes into the film that happened?
I'd say about there, maybe 35. Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
And then did you envision it that way as a turning point in the film, like as the crucial Like, I kind of think it's the crucial scene because it reveals him as like if he's not an alien, he's maybe a psychotic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like they teach us in screenwriting, they teach us the point of no return, the break into the second act, right? It's a moment where the actor is very committed to the problem, whatever it is. And I always saw that kind of as the moment that the mom reveals that how much she's in love with John Smith, and that forces Libby to make it work, kind of. So that's her plan, is to make it work. And this is that moment where it just completely reverses, and the dilemma changes, it gives you that twist. So I don't think I intended it to be as early in the script as it ended up being in the film, but sometimes that's just what happens with edits. It just, things get compacted, and what I will say is that, as far as like a narrative device, like I said before, it very much is that moment where the desire, Libby's desire, is turned on its head. It's that coming of age, wake up, don't be an idiot moment kind of thing, and so it had to be shocking in a way because of the mythos of John. It's hard to break that spell,
Yeah. What about his name? Were you thinking of the puritanical figure, John Smith, or?
I was thinking of a few. Yeah, I was thinking about the colonialist too, because there is a colonization aspect to the mythos. And I was thinking also about the mundanity. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Just it being nondescript, the name, so that you can fly under the radar, because as you see in the film, John is part of a team that's out there trying to figure out this problem in nature, and so he has to kind of be between the lines and not get noticed.
Right. So it's interesting that the lamprey is really essential, right, to the plot of the film because of what he's trying to figure out. Does understanding the film require a knowledge about the lamprey, or is that, you think it doesn't?
No, I think the only thing that was involved with the lamprey, I found the lamprey because the mythos of John is, spoiler alert, so if anybody doesn't want to see this, is that he comes from a freshwater planet, right? And so he can't deal with salt. He can't, and he's adverse to it, and that's why he stores everything in the lake, because it's fresh water, and that's why every scene in the movie he has water in his hand or he's touching water because he needs it to breathe, right? And so the whole salt thing was just because the lampreys were the only species I found. I mean, there actually is more, but in the story, the way I sell it is that the lampreys are the only species in the fossil record that are both salt and fresh water. And of course, the visceral reaction of just seeing, those teeth and the slitheriness. And I also always felt that John is a bit of there's a parasitic element to the film, even though it's not.
Are they parasites? Are lampreys parasites?
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, is they latch on and they feed off their hosts, and then they can go to pretty much, if the host goes out to the ocean, they can go out there. If they come into the freshwater streams, they can go out there. Like, they can interchange, and it doesn't bother them, and they can survive in both. So, and I think that a lot of people have been talking about the film that John is a parasite. I don't necessarily, that's obviously not my intention, but I did want that vibe to come across, that there's something parasitic about John and what he's doing, latching on to these women, getting what he can out of them, and then unfortunately discarding them. I'm trying to tap into a fear that I think is kind of fundamental in our psychology,
Yeah. So what films were in the background when you made this? Like, in your thinking, were there ones, or was it just?
Yeah. I watched a lot of female driven films like Edge of 17. I watched The Virgin Suicides. I watched oh my gosh, I watched a lot of sci-fi films. like I can't even
Was
remember.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Like that's the first thing I kind of thought of.
No, that one didn't wasn't on my radar for this one. I was much more interested in anything with like a female protagonist. I'm not even, I can't even remember if Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It has a male protagonist, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm losing it right now. And you know, I was very interested in like relationships and how they go through, because that's where the start of the idea is all about. It's just this relationship, this love triangle between a stepdad, a mom, and a daughter. And so that was really the research that funded that. And then on another section, I had, you know, a lot of E.T. alien films that influenced it as well. You know,
which ones in particular? Do you remember?
Oh man, I can look it up real quick, because I have a whole list that I make every time I write a film, and I just watch a ton of movies before I write. I also watch a lot of documentaries. Like Trey's character was a little bit influenced by some of the guys in Magic Camp. One of the interesting characters there. Yeah, you get really interesting characters sometimes in docs. You know, just their personalities, and sometimes you can just take a little bit of what they say and you can build out the whole idea of a personality based on that, you know. I find it, especially, you know, some of the documentaries are really great at getting to the truth of people. And once you figure out like the truth of your character, then you can kind of build an entire, you know, personality out of that, you know. And so docs are the best place to go for that, in my opinion.
That's really interesting. So would you say that it's a character-driven film, or is it a conceit-driven film? Like are you building out those characters after the conceit, or is it more like the characters are there and then the conceit's developing out of the characters?
Well, I hope it's happening simultaneously. Like one of the things I still remember, I went to a horror screening for TIFF Midnight Madness. It must have been back in 2016 when they redid the Blair Witch Project. Yeah. I think it was called The Woods or something. It was really well done film, really liked it. And the horror audience that was there, every time one of the characters died, they would cheer and clap. Like they like the kills. Horror audiences enjoy the deaths, right? And I always thought, for my style as a filmmaker, that my job is to be in that same theater one day, and when somebody dies, have them either terrified or sad, you know, because I want you to care about the characters so much that when they're gone, you're like, oh, you know. And I think that's one of the reasons maybe it's getting under people's skin so much, is because the ending is kind of hopeless, and you wanted a victory, you know. I spoiler alert again, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so.
Well, the ending is ambiguous, right? Like it's almost impossible to spoil because it's not clear. I mean, at least, I mean, I know it must be clear to you, but I don't think it's clear to the spectator what the exact, which is, I think that's really effective as an ending. I wonder, so you had, what was for you the hardest thing about making your own film? Like, what was the thing that you just think like, wow, something I just didn't anticipate?
Man, film is just such a beast. It is one of the most difficult things to create on the planet, because there's so many elements to it. You know, it's not just taking a camera and taking a picture.
I know. We came down to the set the one night, and you must have had like 40 people there working, and most of the time they're just standing around, right?
Yeah, and it happens. Like it's hurry up and wait on film sets. You know, sometimes there's a ton to do and you have to do it fast, and other times you're just waiting for one thing to fix. I remember that I don't know if it was that night or the previous night, but this is an example of film. We had, for the light in the lake scene, we had a single light that went out into the lake, a 4K light, and a screw on the light broke, and it kept breaking, and the stunt team that was there to put the light in the lake underwater couldn't fix it, so it kept falling over. We couldn't get it to stand up. We lost 3 hours on that day while we tried to fix this light for one screw, if you think about film, what the most expensive thing on a film set is actually the labor. It's all the people there that are involved in work in making it happen. And so those 3 hours are very expensive. That light is cheap, but those 3 hours are expensive. And of course, as a low budget filmmaker, we don't have the luxury of getting a backup light there. Those are expensive lights. So we roll the dice. We go, okay, let's hope it works. And then you get to set. If it doesn't work, or you have to fix it for 3 hours, you got to fix it for 3 hours. It's just the way it is. So I think I would say overall the hardest thing about making a movie is just getting people to buy in, no matter what position you are, whether you're just trying to get people to read the script, or you're just trying to get people to come on board and be in the film, or you're trying to get people on set motivated. Like half of your job as a director is trying to get people to be as passionate about the film as you are. And buying in is an incredibly, it's an uphill battle for any filmmaker, because there's so much content out there, and there's so many filmmakers out there that are so talented, that it's tough to be front and center, to get that recognition, to get that mentorship, to get that person that believes you and wants to help you make the next one, right? And so the only thing you can really do is put your head down, focus on your next project, and try to get it made.
Yeah. How does that, along those lines, like how does it feel? The negative, I mean, like you've had mostly positive responses, but you were telling me earlier,
I don't know about
you've had some really harsh, like hate via Instagram or whatever. I don't know what these social media things are, but how does that make it tougher? Does it make it like you're less likely to put something out there next time, or that's just part of the game? You just have to kind of deal with that.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I suffer from depression and anxiety, so seeing all these people just being very malicious about the film, it doesn't feel good, but I also kind of try to remind myself that every time they seem to be angry, they're angry at how uncomfortable it was, and how unsettling it was, and how weird it was. And that was kind of the point, so, I guess, and then you get a whole nother group of people that are upset about the one Trump, the one crack I take at Trump in the film.
Well, I forget that. What do you say?
Libby says he grabbed me. Donald Trump grabbed me. And you get a lot of people that are like, very angry about that. I realize how polarized we are about our politics right now. And like, I don't know what to do about that. I mean, it was a recording, like
I thought they were happy that he just grabbed women. I thought
I don't know.
That seems uncontroversial to me, but
yeah, who knows? So, but yeah, I mean, like, I definitely have gotten those people that think it's like, liberal bias or anti-white man or something like that, which anti-white man, the guy's an alien. What are you talking about? Right. but yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that I just keep reminding myself, and I told you this before, it's not the Warhol quote. It's not what they say about you. It's measure. Don't read what they say about you, measure it in inches. Right. And every time I open my Twitter feed and I search what lies below, there's 100 new comments on the film. People are talking about it. People are mad about it, or they're like want other people to see it because they can't figure out whether to like it. They need permission to like it. Like, I love that. Like, can you imagine going online and going, "Can I like this?"
Well, I think that's I actually think that's a pretty common feeling, Brett. Like, I think to make, like, if you realize the other likes it, then you feel like I now have permission to like it myself. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Why did you, and your next film is I think, I mean, I don't know if you're going to end up making that, but right now the film you're working on is also in this horror genre. Do you feel drawn to that, especially? Because I think you wrote your undergraduate screenplay thesis was more of a thriller, right? Like less of a, yeah. So do you feel like you're pretty committed to, is it because horror is cheaper to make, or is it?
It probably is conscious and somewhat unconscious. I mean, I growing up as a child, I was actually terrified when I was like 4 or 5 years old of dying. I had like this weird obsession with the idea of death that kind of crippled me as a little kid for a little bit. I don't remember how old I was. Maybe I was 8 or 9, to the point where my parents had to buy a book that explained death and that it was a natural part of life, right? And so for whatever reason, that obsession with dying has translated itself into making films where death is always a threat. You know, death is the stakes, life or death. And horror just happens to be a genre that's very common.
Right. I just want to interject something because I think you were more right than your parents. Like, death isn't just a natural part of it. Death is the end of life. So
yeah, right.
you were right to feel like, God, it's horrible. And then that kind of gets educated out of you, I think. But it's interesting. So there is a kind of unconscious draw back to the horror film, you think, like that for you is where that it comes back to this childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know where that mentality comes from. I don't know why I have it, but I've always been interested in stories where, you know, my favorite films, my favorite TV shows, they're usually about life or death. They're usually not about, you know, oh, you know, I had a kid I didn't know about, you know, like they're usually about something much like higher tension. And I think that as filmmakers, as storytellers in general, we have to tap into our own fears and tap into our own instincts to make something that feels right, you know, feels cohesive and feels, you know, I don't know about enjoyable to watch, but feels like it did what it was intended to do. And
Right.
so,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm done.
I was just going to say what's interesting to me about that, though, is that so on the one side, it's this really personal film for you, right? And then on the other side, and maybe this is still personal, but I think you felt really compelled to make what you thought was a feminist film, right? Like just showing menstruation seems to me like a feminist act, right? Like it's,
yeah,
you know, like I think you've gotten a lot. That's one of the things people have been, I think guys especially have been critical. I don't know, you probably haven't got any women critical of you for showing menstruation.
no, there's been lots of women that are really angry at that, which I think is really, really interesting. I knew that this was taboo,
Yeah.
but I also realized whenever I read any, you know, book about written by a woman, any screenplay written by a woman about a teenage girl, they always talked about their period and how big of a deal that was when you're young, you know. It was a part of being a woman to them. It was a part of identity, but it was also a source of shame in a lot of ways. And I felt like I couldn't make a coming of age film about sexuality and about fertility without including something like that.
Right.
And the boat scene actually came out much more organically because a boat similar to that is the way my dad told me about the birds and the bees when I was 13 years old. You know, we were on that boat. My dad's 6'5" too. Like he's a big dude. So we're you know, our legs are touching. We're face to face, and we're out in the middle of the river. There's nowhere to go, right?
So you couldn't jump off.
and on top of all that, I'm like 12 or 13 at this point. I already know, you know, like this is not a conversation. He missed the boat on the conversation. So yeah, so it was kind of those two things where I wanted this really uncomfortable scene that shocks her out of her desire, and on top of it, I just felt like I had a duty in a way to approach this because every female-driven narrative I had read before that made it very important. They said it was so important to being a teenage girl, you know.
But is there another horror film that deals with it? I don't think there is. I mean, not a famous one, at least, is there?
I mean, I know there's other horror films that probably deal with menstruation to some degree, but I don't think there's ones that deal with it in this way.
Is Carrie?
I honestly.
I mean, the
can't
blood
remember.
is dumb, but that's pig's blood. It's not.
Yeah. It's. Yeah. But I think maybe it's trying to get that.
Right.
You know, like trying to get you to that idea. You know. I've had a lot of. I've been thinking about it a lot too, and I'm not sure if it's been done and shot, and it's too bad. Maybe if we shot it more, it wouldn't be so controversial and so
Right.
taboo. I mean, this is, and it's the irony of it is that John on the boat is saying this is completely natural. It's okay, like he's saying what society should be saying.
Right, but that's how you know he's an alien.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, that's
So,
true. That's interesting. So, but what fascinates me is that horror is so focused on the final girl who's often a teenage girl, and so you would think menstruation would be a big issue, and and often, well, I guess typically in horror you're punished, like the girl is punished for her sexuality, so the final girl is non-sexual. I
mhm.
mean, was that a factor for you in the? I mean, I don't want to maybe totally give away the end, but were you conscious of that, like punishing the teenage girl for her sexuality,
Yeah,
or
I didn't think of it like that. I thought of it more like a home fatale situation where the power was with the looker, and then all of a sudden it switches and it's with this other person that then controls the narrative, even though they're in the background in a way. Um, and so I wasn't necessarily thinking to punish Liberty because she realizes so early on that this guy's bad, and she does do all the things to try to get out of it.
Mhm.
Um, she just unfortunately, is tied to Michelle at the hip, and Michelle is the one that's even deeper. She doesn't see the problems because she doesn't see what Libby sees. So yeah, I don't think my intention was to punish Liberty for her sexuality at all. Um, but I think that um, you know the sexuality of the film is kind of fundamental to it because you know it's like we function on desire, and to a degree that's one of the reasons I think people are uncomfortable with too, is because it's sexualizing a male body instead of a
Right.
female body.
Oh, well,
And
I wonder if
so
that's
that
not the major part of the critique, right? Like that would be my guess, that most of the people who are finding the film uncomfortable are finding it the fact that, I mean, he's sexualized from the beginning to the end, right? Like
yeah
that's, so I guess to me that would be my reading of their reading of
yeah
the film, right? Like that's just very uncomfortable. Like I mean, it's one thing if Brad Pitt is sexualized, and it's another thing because it's not often done with the camera. I think
mhm,
even to Brad Pitt. I mean, maybe Fight Club, but there he's beaten up so badly that you often don't.
right.
It's less clear that he's there to be desired, and whereas John, I think from the beginning,
Yeah.
is there to be desired. So I think that's a key part.
And I think back on it, and there's that one shot in I think it was Thelma and Louise where they kind of pan up on Brad Pitt, and that shot is in the Criterion collection of shot. Like people just know that shot. Like, I describe that, and people will immediately remember it. And he's shirtless and he's very overtly sexualized, but that's the only shot in the whole film
Right.
where it's really like that. Whereas for John, we're continually doing it for a long period of time. And maybe that's what's bumping for people is they go, wait, a man sexualized through female eyes? I don't know,
Right.
through a female gaze. I don't know if I can handle this. So I was trying to think of any other. I know Magic Mike, but I still think Magic Mike is oddly enough like a male gaze film because it's about their sexuality rather than their objectification. And about their exploits
It's from
more
their
than
point of view, right? Like
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
key thing to it. I think that's right, Brad. Like I think Soderbergh. I didn't see the sequel, but it's for sure in the first one that Soderbergh directed. I think it. You're right that they're sexualized, but it's like a celebration of their own sexualization of themselves, not about them being objectified in any
Right.
way. So that's an important distinction.
Which is interesting too because it's such a cult movie. Like women love that movie.
Yeah.
LGBTQ community loves that movie. That's a very very popular movie, and yet I would still say that the men are not powerless objects. They're very much in control of the film.
Right.
and so whereas wherever cinema typically puts the male in the driver's seat, so it's so unusual, and we typically objectify the women. So it's so unusual to have this opportunity, and yet it wasn't the opportunity you would necessarily imagine when you hear the pitch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a fascinating point. I mean, I think Soderbergh probably imagined he was doing what you're doing, but it just didn't come off in the film, right? Like I think
I'm not going to compare myself to Soderbergh.
I did it.
So, but thank you, but yes.
Yeah, but I think that's right. I think that he did have an idea of, I'm going to flip it around, right? But I think for the reasons you're talking about, it comes across as a film from their perspective. Whereas I think one of the things that really is striking about your film, then we should finish up, but I want to say something, a last thing before we stop. But one of the things striking about your film is that even when John is the driving force of the narrative, he's still an object for us as spectators, right? I don't think there's ever a point where we're like, okay, now we're over to his side, because even at the end of the film, when he's totally in charge, really, we're still viewing him as an object.
Yeah, we made a conscious effort that once the boat scene happens and everything gets reverted, that it was less about Liberty's gaze and more about John's control of the camera, even if he was in the backdrop. So there's certain shots where even John, out of focus in the backdrop, still is present, and you can't look away from him. He has this power over the camera, and that's what's trying to, and that's kind of propelling that threat. That this is coming, and trying to tap into that psychology of, this is what I liked, and now I don't want it, but it keeps coming after me, kind of thing.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because that's kind of how female sexuality is typically framed in like a film noir, right? Like there's a way in which he's kind of modeled on the femme fatale, right? Like she dominates like wherever Barbara Stanwyck is in the image, in Double Indemnity, she dominates it, right? No matter what Fred McMurray's doing or whatever. And yet she's just totally destructive for him. Like so I think, and we're drawn to her nonetheless. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it, as a kind of reversal of the noir situation.
Yeah, and I think what we did is we constantly placed him just in that spot where he was right over the shoulder. And if you're really doing proper framing, the shot's kind of more framed for him than it is framed for the person who's being shot. And so ours was a little bit more subtle, I'd say, than Double Indemnity. But we were trying to get there in a way, and give him this power over the camera and over the viewer without making it too overt.
Well, I like that a lot, Brad, that you're kind of, you're staining the image, right? Like
that's what we were talking about.
You're not making him the central focus. Like, I think you're right. Like, film noir too much makes the femme fatale just the central focus, but you're doing this other thing where the image is slightly off. And it's him. The reason it's off is because he's this object of desire that's distorting what the visual field, right?
Yeah, that was actually the exact term I used to Jimmy to communicate. As like I want him to stain that you can't look away from, but it's in the background. I felt that was what we were going for. So hopefully it came across in the film.
Yeah, it definitely did. So I want to. So the title of the film. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but the title of the film got changed. Like you had an original title.
Right.
So what was your original title?
The original title was Viscous, because water is such an important element, and also kind of makes you think of vicious, and makes it feel something serpenty, or I don't know if that's a word, but it was supposed to give you emote these things when you read it. But unfortunately, when we went out to international sales, I guess viscous doesn't translate well, or I just don't know what happened there. But there was a big communication issue between everyone kept thinking we were saying vicious, and we kept saying no, it's viscous. And so eventually they just had to change the title. into something a little bit stronger. And to be honest, when I first thought about it, when I was first going, I ended up liking Viscous more. But when I first thought about it, I thought about What Lies Beneath, but then I was like, nope, that's the Harrison Ford film. Michelle Pfeiffer film, can't do that. So I don't hate the title at all. Like, I think it's a pretty decent title, especially for being retitled. But yeah, the original intention was Viscous. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's funny because I read a lot of the comments by people that saw the film. They're like, wait a minute, is this a sequel to What Lies Beneath? So, I mean, I think the title's good. I just think that's the danger of it, right? Like, it's similarity to the Harrison Ford. I think it's a Robert Zemeckis film, actually, right?
Yeah, it is. And I wouldn't be surprised if the distributor knew exactly what they were doing with that.
You think so? You think that actually helped?
I mean, I think that. Excuse me. I'm not sure if What Lies Beneath was financially successful, but I would say that it is. Okay, but I would say that it was very popular. Like, it was part of our pop, especially that image with the hand coming out of the bathtub. Like, that's kind of stained in people's memories. And of course, attached to that image is the title right above it, What Lies Beneath. Right. So you get a ton of people that'll see that title, What Lies Below, and they'll go, what is this? It'll launch a curiosity. I think it was a smart thing that they did, to be honest. To get people. I
agree. Watch. The other thing, that they actually were shot at almost the same place, because that bridge that's the only reason I know the film really well is because it was shot in Vermont.
Oh, wow.
Right down near where you shot your film in New York, and that bridge that goes between New York and Vermont, it's down like past Virgins, like it. Yeah. That bridge is where he crashes the car off. And
that's so wild.
Yeah, so it's really an interesting kind of point of connection, and I think there are other similarities, really. So that's interesting. I think what's all interesting about that film came out, and then Castaway was his next film, and so a lot of people that hate Zemeckis, including, I mean, I don't hate him, but I'm not that great of a fan. But I thought, wow, there's two really good films right in a row that he made. So that was sort of interesting. But yeah, I think that it makes sense why they changed the title. And I mean, I think Viscous is probably better, but I can see and I think it's interesting because there was that stuff about What Lies Below, or What Lies Beneath, sorry, initially, but I haven't heard that since it's come out on Netflix. Like, it seems like people are just taking it on its own terms now.
Yeah, I think it's on its own thing now. I mean, every now and then you get somebody going, "Oh, I thought this was What Lies Beneath. What did I get into?" But yeah, I think it's definitely. I think it's made its own little name for itself. It's very, very small, not What Lies Beneath level, but it's.
Well, we have a lot of time ahead of it, so maybe it'll come up to that.
It's only been out for 2 days, so who knows?
So great to talk to you, Brad. And
great to talk to you, Todd.
Okay. Anything else you want to add, or that I missed?
No, I just sorry, my dog's going crazy. Gizmo. Sorry. I just, anyone who checks out the film, I thank you ahead of time. I hope you still hope to see other work of mine after watching it, and don't hate me too much. It was intended to be unsettling. It's intended to be creepy. Just remember it's a movie. I hope.
Well, I don't think it's. I would just say I don't think it's just a movie. Like, I think it's really. I think it's really got something smart going on behind it. So
thank you. You're too kind, Todd. I appreciate
highly recommended.
All right.
Thanks, Brad.
You, sir. All right. Thank you, Todd.